Isabella Martinez's hands shook as she unlocked the back door of Romano's bistro at 5 a.m., her heart heavy with the decision she'd made the night before. Hidden in her cleaning cart, wrapped in her own jacket, was a container of leftover pasta from the restaurant's kitchen, food she'd taken without permission to feed the elderly woman she'd found sleeping behind the dumpster. The woman, who called herself Rose, had been living on the streets for weeks. Isabella had been secretly bringing her food and blankets, knowing that if manager Rick Stevens discovered her acts of kindness, she'd lose the job that barely kept her own family afloat. But as Isabella helped Rose into the restaurant's warm employee break room, she had no idea that the security cameras were recording everything. She didn't know that the restaurant's owner, Dominic Romano, was reviewing footage from his office upstairs at that very moment. And she certainly didn't know that when Dominic saw the elderly woman's face on the screen, he would drop his coffee cup in shock, his hands trembling as he whispered a name he hadn't spoken in 15 years. "Mama!" To witness this incredible story of hidden identities and family reunions, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Share in the comments where you're watching from as we work together toward our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Isabella Martinez had been working as a janitor at Romano's bistro for 2 years, and in that time, she'd learned to navigate the complex hierarchy of the upscale Chicago restaurant with careful precision. As a single mother of 2 young children, she couldn't afford to make waves or draw attention to herself. Her job paid just enough to cover rent and groceries, with nothing left over for emergencies or luxuries. The bistro was one of the most exclusive dining establishments in downtown Chicago, known for its authentic Italian cuisine and elegant atmosphere. The clientele consisted mainly of wealthy business people, politicians, and celebrities who paid premium prices for both the food and the discretion that came with dining at Romano's. Isabella's shift began at 5 a.m., 2 hours before the kitchen staff arrived and 4 hours before the restaurant opened for lunch. She preferred the solitude of those early morning hours, when she could clean in peace without the chaos of service or the condescending remarks from manager Rick Stevens. Stevens was a cruel man who seemed to take pleasure in making the lives of the restaurant's lower-paid employees miserable. He berated the dishwashers for working too slowly, criticized the servers for minor infractions, and treated Isabella as if she were invisible, except when he wanted to complain about her work. 3 weeks ago, everything had changed when Isabella discovered Rose. The elderly woman had been huddled behind the restaurant's dumpster on a particularly cold October morning, wearing clothes that had seen better days and clutching a worn photograph to her chest. Isabella's heart had immediately gone out to her. Rose reminded her of her own grandmother, who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Isabella had asked in both English and Spanish, unsure which language the woman might understand. Rose had looked up with tired but kind eyes. "I'm fine, dear. Just resting." But Isabella could see that Rose was far from fine. She was thin, clearly malnourished, and her clothes were inadequate for the Chicago weather. Without hesitation, Isabella had offered her the sandwich she'd brought for her own lunch. "I can't take your food," Rose had protested weakly. "Please," Isabella had insisted, "I have plenty at home." It was a lie. Isabella's own children often went to bed hungry, but she couldn't bear to see an elderly woman suffering on the streets. That first act of kindness had led to others. Isabella began bringing Rose leftovers from the restaurant, food that would have been thrown away anyway. She brought blankets from her own home, and on the coldest nights, she even let Rose sleep in the restaurant's employee break room, always making sure to get her out before the morning staff arrived. Isabella knew she was taking enormous risks. If Stevens discovered what she was doing, she'd be fired immediately. Taking food from the restaurant, even food destined for the garbage, was considered theft. Allowing a homeless person into the building was a security violation. But every time Isabella looked at Rose's grateful face, she knew she couldn't stop helping. There was something special about Rose, something that went beyond her obvious need for assistance. Despite her circumstances, she carried herself with dignity and grace. She spoke with an educated accent and occasionally let slip references to a life that had clearly been very different from her current situation. "I had a son once," Rose had told Isabella one morning as they shared coffee in the break room. "A beautiful boy with dark hair and his father's stubborn streak. I haven't seen him in so many years." "What happened?" Isabella had asked gently. Rose's eyes had filled with tears. "Pride. Foolish pride, and words that can't be taken back. I said things I didn't mean, and he said things that broke my heart. By the time I realized how wrong I was, it was too late. He'd moved away, changed his name, built a new life without me." Isabella had wanted to ask more questions, but Rose had changed the subject, and Isabella had respected her privacy. This morning was different, though. Rose had been coughing for days, and Isabella was worried that she was getting sick. The weather was turning colder, and Isabella knew that Rose wouldn't survive much longer on the streets. "Rose," Isabella said as she helped the elderly woman into the break room, "you need to see a doctor. That cough sounds serious." "I can't afford a doctor, dear," Rose replied, settling gratefully into one of the plastic chairs. "And I won't go to a shelter. I've heard too many stories about what happens to people like me in those places." Isabella heated up the pasta she'd brought and placed it in front of Rose, along with a cup of hot coffee. "Then you need to find your son. Whatever happened between you, I'm sure he'd want to help if he knew you were in trouble." Rose shook her head sadly. "He's probably forgotten I exist. And even if he hasn't, how would I find him? I don't even know what name he uses now." "What was his name before?" Isabella asked. "Dominic," Rose said softly. "Dominic Romano. He was going to take over his father's restaurant business, but after our fight, he said he never wanted to see me again. He said he'd rather start over with nothing than be part of our family." Isabella's blood ran cold. Romano. The same last name as the restaurant where she worked. But it had to be a coincidence. Romano was a common Italian name, and there were probably dozens of Dominic Romanos in Chicago. "What did your son look like?" Isabella asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Tall, dark hair, brown eyes," Rose replied. "He had a scar on his left temple from when he fell off his bicycle as a child. And he had his father's hands, strong, capable hands that could fix anything." Isabella's heart began to race. She'd seen the restaurant's owner, Dominic Romano, exactly 3 times in the 2 years she'd worked there. Each time, she'd noticed his height, his dark hair, and yes, the faint scar on his left temple. But the idea that this homeless woman could be the mother of one of Chicago's most successful restaurateurs seemed impossible. "Rose," Isabella said carefully, "what's your full name?" "Rose Romano," the elderly woman replied. "Though I suppose that doesn't matter anymore. I gave up the right to that name when I drove my son away." Before Isabella could respond, she heard the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside the break room. Her heart stopped. The kitchen staff wasn't supposed to arrive for another hour. "Hide," Isabella whispered urgently, helping Rose into the supply closet just as Rick Stevens burst through the break room door. "Martinez!" Stevens barked. "What the hell are you doing in here? You're supposed to be cleaning the dining room." "I was just taking a quick break," Isabella said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll get back to work right away." Stevens looked around the room suspiciously, his eyes lingering on the empty pasta container and the 2 coffee cups on the table. "Why are there 2 cups?" he demanded. Isabella's mind raced. I made coffee earlier and forgot to clean up the cup. The second one is fresh." Stevens stepped closer, and Isabella could smell the alcohol on his breath. He'd clearly been drinking, which made him even more unpredictable and dangerous than usual. "You're lying," he said coldly. "Someone else was in here." "Who was it?" Isabella's heart pounded as Stevens circled the break room like a predator, his bloodshot eyes scanning every corner for evidence of her supposed deception. She could hear Rose's labored breathing from inside the supply closet and prayed that Stevens wouldn't notice the sound. I'm not lying, Mr. Stevens, Isabella said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. I've been working alone all morning. Don't take me for a fool, Martinez, Stevens snarled, moving closer until she could feel his hot breath on her face. I know you've been up to something. I've seen you acting suspicious, sneaking around, taking longer breaks than you're supposed to. Isabella took a step back, her hands trembling. I've just been trying to do my job. Your job? Stevens laughed harshly. Your job is to clean toilets and empty trash cans. You're nothing but a glorified maid, and you'd better remember that. The cruelty in his voice made Isabella's chest tighten with anger, but she forced herself to remain calm. She couldn't afford to lose her temper, not with Rose hiding just a few feet away. I understand, sir, Isabella said quietly. I'll get back to work now. But Stevens wasn't finished. You know what I think, Martinez. I think you've been stealing from us. Food, supplies, maybe even money. I think you're running some kind of scam. That's not true, Isabella protested, but her voice came out weaker than she'd intended. Prove it, Stevens demanded. Empty your pockets. Show me what's in your cleaning cart. Isabella's blood ran cold. Her cart contained the blanket she'd brought for Rose, along with some crackers she'd saved from her own lunch. If Stevens found them, he'd know she was helping someone. Mr. Stevens, please, empty your pockets now, or I'll call the police and have you arrested for theft. Isabella slowly reached into her uniform pockets, pulling out her keys, a few crumpled dollar bills, and the photograph Rose had dropped the night before. Stevens snatched the photo from her hands, studying it with narrowed eyes. The photograph showed a young man in his 20s, standing next to an older woman in front of what looked like a restaurant. Both were smiling, their arms around each other in obvious affection. Who are these people? Stevens demanded. I found it in the parking lot, Isabella lied. I was going to put it in the lost and found. Stevens stared at the photo for a long moment, his expression shifting from suspicion to something that looked almost like recognition. Then his face hardened again. You're lying, he said coldly. This is your photo. These are your accomplices. No, sir, I swear. Stevens grabbed Isabella's arm roughly, his fingers digging into her skin. I'm calling the police. You're going to be arrested for theft, trespassing, and whatever other charges I can think of. Please, Isabella begged, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. I have 2 children. I need this job. I haven't stolen anything, I promise. Should have thought of that before you decided to run your little charity operation out of my restaurant. Stevens sneered. At that moment, the supply closet door opened, and Rose stepped out, her chin raised with dignity, despite her obvious fear. Let her go, Rose said firmly. If you want to blame someone, blame me. Isabella was only trying to help. Stevens released Isabella's arm and turned his attention to Rose, his expression shifting to one of disgust. Well, well, he said mockingly. Look what we have here, a vagrant in my restaurant, eating our food. I'm not a vagrant, Rose said quietly. I'm just someone who needed help, and this kind young woman provided it. Kind? Stevens laughed harshly. She's a thief, and you're trespassing. I'm calling the police to have you both arrested. Sir, please, Isabella pleaded. She's elderly, she's sick. Can't you just let her go? I'll take full responsibility. You're damn right you'll take responsibility, Stevens snarled. You're both going to jail. He pulled out his phone and began dialing, but before he could complete the call, the break room door opened again. This time, it was Maria Santos, one of the senior servers, who looked shocked to see the confrontation taking place. Rick, what's going on? Maria asked, her eyes moving between Stevens, Isabella, and Rose. I caught Martinez harboring a homeless woman in our break room, Stevens said triumphantly. They've been stealing food and using our facilities for God knows how long. Maria looked at Isabella with sympathy. She'd always been kind to the cleaning staff, unlike Stevens, and Isabella could see the conflict in her expression. Rick, maybe we should talk to Mr. Romano before we call the police, Maria suggested carefully. Romano doesn't need to be bothered with this, Stevens snapped. I'm the manager. I handle personnel issues. But this is pretty serious, Maria persisted, and you know how he feels about the staff. He might want to handle this personally. Stevens' face flushed red with anger. Are you questioning my authority? No, I'm just suggesting. I don't care what you're suggesting, Stevens interrupted. This is my decision to make. As Stevens continued his rant, Isabella noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. Rose was staring at Maria with an expression of intense concentration, as if she was trying to remember something important. Excuse me, Rose said suddenly, interrupting Stevens mid-sentence. Maria, is it? How long have you worked here? Maria looked surprised by the question. About 5 years. Why? And the owner, Mr. Romano, what does he look like? Stevens stepped between them aggressively. That's enough questions from you, lady. You don't get to interrogate my staff. But Rose ignored him, her attention focused entirely on Maria. Please, it's important. What does he look like? Maria glanced nervously at Stevens, then back at Rose. He's tall, dark hair, brown eyes. He has a small scar on his temple. He's very kind to the employees, always fair. Rose's legs gave out, and she would have fallen if Isabella hadn't caught her. The elderly woman's face had gone completely white, and her hands were shaking violently. Rose, what's wrong? Isabella asked urgently. It's him, Rose whispered, tears streaming down her face. After all these years, it's really him. What are you talking about? Stevens demanded. Rose looked up at him with eyes full of pain and hope. Dominic Romano is my son. This is his restaurant, and I'm the mother he hasn't seen in 15 years. The break room fell completely silent. Stevens stared at Rose as if she'd lost her mind, while Maria's eyes widened in shock. You're crazy, Stevens said finally. Dominic Romano's mother is dead. He told me so himself. No, Rose said softly. I'm not dead. I'm just lost. And I've been trying to find my way back to him for so long. Isabella felt her world tilting on its axis. If Rose was telling the truth, then she'd been helping the mother of her employer, a woman who had been living on the streets while her son owned one of the most successful restaurants in Chicago. We need to call Mr. Romano, Maria said quietly. No, Stevens said firmly. We're calling the police. This woman is delusional, and Martinez is still a thief. But as he reached for his phone again, they all heard footsteps in the corridor outside, expensive shoes on polished floors, moving with purpose and authority. The footsteps stopped outside the break room door. The break room door opened slowly, and Dominic Romano stepped inside. Isabella had only seen him from a distance before, but up close, his presence was even more commanding. He was exactly as Rose had described. Tall, with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes, and the faint scar on his left temple that spoke of childhood adventures. But what struck Isabella most was the expression on his face. He looked confused, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure why he'd come down to the employee break room at this early hour. Mr. Romano, Stevens said quickly, his voice taking on a sycophantic tone that made Isabella's skin crawl. I was just handling a situation with one of our employees. Nothing for you to worry about. Dominic's gaze swept the room, taking in Stevens's aggressive posture, Maria's worried expression, Isabella's tear-stained face, and finally settling on Rose. For a moment time seemed suspended as father and son looked at each other across 15 years of silence and pain. Isabella watched Dominic's face change as recognition dawned. The color drained from his cheeks, his hands began to tremble, and his mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. Dominic, Rose whispered, her voice barely audible. Mama. The word escaped Dominic's lips like a prayer, full of disbelief and longing. Stevens looked between them in confusion. Sir, this woman is trespassing. She claims to be your mother, but I know that's impossible because— Get out, Dominic said quietly, his eyes never leaving Rose's face. Sir? Stevens asked, clearly not understanding. I said get out, Dominic repeated, his voice stronger now. All of you, except— He looked at Isabella. You stay. But Mr. Romano, Stevens protested, this woman has been stealing food, harboring a vagrant. Dominic finally turned to look at Stevens, and Isabella saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. If you say one more word about my mother, you'll be looking for a new job. Get out. Now. Stevens's face went through several color changes before he finally backed toward the door. Your mother. But sir, you said she was... I said get out! Dominic's voice cracked like a whip, and Stevens practically ran from the room. Maria followed more slowly, giving Isabella a sympathetic look before closing the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella stood frozen, unsure whether she should leave or stay, while Dominic and Rose continued to stare at each other as if they were seeing ghosts. You're so thin, Dominic said finally, his voice breaking. You're so successful, Rose replied, tears streaming down her face. Look at you. Look at what you've built. Mama, what happened to you? Where have you been? I thought you were dead. Rose's laugh was bitter. Dead to you, maybe, and I deserved that. The things I said to you, the way I treated your dreams, your ambitions, I was so wrong, Dominic, so terribly wrong. Isabella felt like she was intruding on an intensely private moment, but she was afraid to move, afraid to break the fragile connection that was forming between mother and son. I looked for you, Dominic said, taking a tentative step closer. After Papa died, I tried to find you. I wanted to tell you about the restaurant, about everything I'd accomplished. I wanted to make you proud. I was always proud of you, Rose said fiercely, even when I was too stubborn and foolish to show it. Even when I said those horrible things about your father's business, about how you'd never amount to anything if you followed in his footsteps. I was wrong about everything. What happened to the house? To your life? How did you end up? Dominic gestured helplessly, taking in Rose's worn clothes and obvious poverty. Rose's shoulders sagged with shame. Pride. Foolish pride. After you left, I refused help from anyone who knew our family. I sold the house, gave away most of the money to charity, thinking I was proving some kind of point. When the money ran out, I was too ashamed to reach out to anyone who might have helped. But why didn't you come to me? You knew where the restaurant was. Because I thought you hated me, Rose whispered. Because I thought I'd destroyed any chance of forgiveness with my cruel words. Because I was a coward who was too afraid of rejection to try. Isabella watched as Dominic struggled with emotions that were clearly overwhelming him. She could see the pain of 15 years of separation warring with the love that had never really died. I could never hate you, Dominic said finally. I was angry, yes, hurt, but I never stopped loving you. I never stopped hoping that someday... Someday what? That someday you'd walk through that door and tell me you were proud of what I'd built, that you'd forgive me for the things I said when I left. Rose stood up shakily, and Isabella instinctively moved to help her. But Rose waved her away gently. You have nothing to be forgiven for, my son. You were right to leave. You were right to build your own life. And this, she gestured around the restaurant, this is more beautiful than anything your father or I ever imagined. Dominic took another step closer, and Isabella could see that he was fighting back tears. Mama, I'm so sorry. If I had known you were struggling, if I had known you were alone... You couldn't have known, Rose said firmly. I made sure of that. I was too proud to reach out, too afraid of your rejection, but this young woman... She turned to look at Isabella with gratitude. She saved my life. She's been feeding me, caring for me, risking her job to help a stranger. Dominic's attention shifted to Isabella for the first time since he'd entered the room. Is that true? Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. I couldn't let her go hungry. She reminded me of my grandmother. She's been bringing me food for weeks, Rose continued. Blankets, coffee, kindness when the rest of the world looked right through me. She has 2 children of her own to feed, but she shared what little she had. Dominic studied Isabella's face intently. What's your name? Isabella Martinez, sir. How long have you worked here? 2 years, sir. And Stevens was threatening to fire you for helping my mother? Isabella nodded, not trusting her voice. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, then turned back to Rose. Mama, will you let me take care of you now? Will you let me make up for all the years we lost? Only if you can forgive a foolish old woman for her pride and her cruel words. There's nothing to forgive, Dominic said, finally closing the distance between them and pulling his mother into his arms. Welcome home, Mama. Welcome home. As Isabella watched the reunion, she felt tears streaming down her own face. But she also felt a growing worry about her future at the restaurant. Stevens would never forgive her for this humiliation, and she wasn't sure that even Dominic's gratitude would be enough to protect her job. 2 hours later, Isabella found herself sitting in Dominic Romano's private office, still trying to process everything that had happened. Rose was resting in the restaurant's VIP dining room, wrapped in a warm blanket and eating her first proper meal in weeks, while Dominic had called his personal physician to examine her. I can't thank you enough, Dominic said, settling into the chair across from Isabella. My mother tells me you've been caring for her for weeks, even though you barely know her. Anyone would have done the same thing, Isabella replied quietly. No, Dominic said firmly. They wouldn't have. Most people would have walked past her, pretended not to see her, convinced themselves it wasn't their problem. You chose to help, even though it put your job at risk. Isabella shifted uncomfortably in her chair. About my job, Mr. Romano. I understand if you need to let me go. I did take food from the restaurant without permission, and I did allow an unauthorized person into the building. I know those are serious violations. Dominic leaned back in his chair, studying her face. Is that what you think is going to happen? That I'm going to fire you? I don't know what to think, Isabella admitted. Let me ask you something, Dominic said. Why did you help her? Really? What made you risk everything for a stranger? Isabella considered the question carefully. She reminded me of my grandmother, but more than that, she had this dignity about her, even in her circumstances. She was grateful for every kindness, never demanded anything, always worried about being a burden. I could see that she'd had a different life once, that something had gone wrong, but she was still fundamentally a good person. And you never suspected who she might be. Not until this morning when she told me about her son. Even then, I thought it had to be a coincidence. The idea that she could be your mother seemed impossible. Dominic nodded slowly. My mother and I had a terrible fight 15 years ago. She thought I was wasting my life following in my father's footsteps, that I should pursue something more respectable than the restaurant business. I was young and proud, and I said some things I've regretted every day since. She regrets her words too, Isabella said softly. She talks about you constantly. She's so proud of what you've accomplished. I know that now, Dominic replied. But for 15 years, I believe she wanted nothing to do with me. I even told people she was dead, because it was easier than explaining why we didn't speak. Isabella felt a pang of sympathy for both of them. Families are complicated. Yes, they are. Dominic was quiet for a moment, then continued. Isabella, I want to offer you a different position here at the restaurant. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. Sir? I need someone I can trust to help care for my mother. Someone who understands her, who's already proven they'll put her welfare above their own interests. I'd like you to become her companion and caregiver. I don't have any medical training. You have something more valuable than training, Dominic interrupted. You have compassion, and you have my mother's trust, which is not easily earned. What about my children? I need to be home with them in the evenings. The position would come with a significant salary increase, full health benefits, and flexible hours. You'd work primarily during the day while your children are in school, and you'd have evenings and weekends free unless there was an emergency. Isabella stared at him in disbelief. Mr. Romano, that's incredibly generous, but I can't accept charity. It's not charity, Dominic said firmly. It's a job offer based on merit. You've already proven you're exactly what my mother needs. And frankly, what I need, too. Before Isabella could respond, there was a knock on the office door. Maria Santos entered, looking nervous. "Mr. Romano, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation downstairs." "What kind of situation?" "It's Rick Stevens. He's telling the staff that you've lost your mind, that you're being manipulated by a con artist and her accomplice. He's saying that the woman claiming to be your mother is running some kind of scam." Dominic's expression darkened. "Where is Stevens now?" "In the kitchen, talking to the prep cooks." Dominic stood up abruptly. "Isabella, would you mind staying with my mother for a few minutes? I need to handle this." "Of course," Isabella replied. As Dominic left the office, Isabella made her way to the VIP dining room where Rose was finishing her meal. The elderly woman looked better already. The color had returned to her cheeks, and she seemed more alert. "How are you feeling?" Isabella asked, sitting down beside her. "Like I'm dreaming," Rose replied with a smile. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up behind that dumpster and discover this was all a fantasy." "It's real," Isabella assured her. "Your son loves you very much. He's been carrying the pain of your separation for 15 years. "As have I," Rose said softly. "I was such a fool, Isabella. I let pride and fear keep me from my only child. If you hadn't helped me, if you hadn't brought me here, you would have found your way back to him eventually," Isabella said. "Love always finds a way." They could hear raised voices from the kitchen area, and Rose looked worried. "Is Dominic in trouble because of me?" "No," Isabella said firmly. "He's just dealing with someone who doesn't understand the situation." 20 minutes later, Dominic returned, looking satisfied but grim. "Stevens has been terminated," he announced. "He's been escorted from the building and he won't be returning." "What was he saying?" Rose asked. "Nothing worth repeating," Dominic replied, "but it made me realize how toxic his influence has been on this restaurant. Several staff members came forward to tell me about his treatment of employees, his drinking, his general cruelty. I should have dealt with this long ago." He turned to Isabella. "Which brings me back to my offer. I need someone I can trust to help manage the human resources side of this business. Someone who understands what it's like to struggle, who will treat all employees with dignity and respect." "You want me to be an HR manager?" Isabella asked, confused. "I want you to be whatever you're comfortable being," Dominic said. "Caregiver for my mother, HR consultant, or both. The important thing is that you're part of our family now, whether you take the job or not." Isabella felt overwhelmed by the generosity and trust being offered to her. "I need some time to think about it." "I take all the time you need," Dominic said. "But Isabella—" "Yes? Thank you for everything. You gave me back my mother, and you gave her back her life. That's a debt I can never repay." As Isabella looked at Rose and Dominic sitting together, she realized that sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as ordinary acts of kindness. She'd thought she was just helping a hungry elderly woman, but she'd actually been orchestrating a miracle. 6 months later, Isabella stood in the newly renovated office of Romano's Bistro, reviewing applications for the restaurant's expanded scholarship program. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into something beautiful and far-reaching. The scholarship program, funded by the restaurant's profits, provided culinary training and education opportunities for underprivileged youth in Chicago. It was Rose's idea, born from her desire to turn her years of suffering into something positive for others. "How many applications do we have this month?" Rose asked, entering the office with a cup of tea. She looked radiant, healthy, well-dressed and glowing with purpose. 47, Isabella replied. "And they're all incredible. These kids have such amazing stories and so much potential." Rose had thrived in her new role as the scholarship program's coordinator. Her years on the streets had given her a deep understanding of poverty and struggle, while her natural intelligence and education made her perfect for evaluating candidates and mentoring recipients. "Any that stand out?" Rose asked, settling into her chair. "There's a 17-year-old girl named Maria who's been working 3 jobs to support her younger siblings. She wants to become a chef so she can open a restaurant that provides job training for other at-risk youth. Schedule an interview," Rose said immediately. "She sounds like exactly the kind of person we want to help." Isabella made a note in the file, then looked up at Rose with affection. The transformation in the elderly woman over the past 6 months had been remarkable. She'd moved into a beautiful apartment near the restaurant, reconnected with old friends, and thrown herself into charitable work with an energy that belied her age. "How's Dominic doing with the new location?" Isabella asked. "Excited and terrified in equal measure," Rose replied with a laugh. "He's been dreaming of expanding the restaurant for years, but now that it's actually happening, he's second-guessing every decision." Romano's Bistro was opening a second location in an underserved neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. The new restaurant would serve the same high-quality food as the original, but at prices the local community could afford. It was another of Rose's ideas, part of her mission to use the family's success to help others. "He shouldn't worry," Isabella said. "The community is so excited about having a quality restaurant in the neighborhood. The advance reservations are already booked solid for the first month." Isabella's own transformation had been just as dramatic as Rose's. She'd accepted Dominic's offer to become the restaurant's director of community relations, a position that combined HR responsibilities with oversight of the scholarship program and community outreach efforts. The salary increase had allowed her to move her children to a better neighborhood and provide them with opportunities she'd never dreamed possible. "Speaking of Dominic," Rose said with a mischievous smile, "he wanted to talk to you about something when he gets back from the new location." "What about?" "He didn't say, but he seemed nervous. Good nervous, if you know what I mean." Before Isabella could ask what that meant, Dominic entered the office, carrying a bouquet of flowers and wearing an expression that was indeed nervously excited. "Ladies," he said, his voice slightly higher than usual, "how's the scholarship review going?" "Wonderfully," Rose replied, standing up, "and I just remembered I have a very important phone call to make. I'll leave you two to discuss business." She winked at Isabella and practically floated out of the office, leaving Isabella alone with Dominic and a growing sense of anticipation. "Flowers?" Isabella asked, noting the beautiful arrangement of roses and lilies. "For you," Dominic said, handing them over, "to celebrate." "Celebrate what?" Dominic took a deep breath. "Isabella, these past 6 months have been the best of my life. Not just because I got my mother back, but because of everything you've brought to our family. Your kindness, your intelligence, your incredible heart. You've changed everything for the better." Isabella felt her pulse quicken. "Dominic, let me finish," he said, moving closer. "I know this might seem sudden, and I know we've been focused on business and family, but I can't ignore what I'm feeling anymore." "What are you feeling?" Isabella asked softly. "I'm feeling like the luckiest man in the world because I get to work with you every day. I'm feeling grateful that fate brought you into our lives, and I'm feeling like I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how special you are." Isabella's heart was pounding now. "Dominic, are you saying—" "I'm saying I love you," Dominic said simply. "I love your compassion, your strength, your dedication to helping others. I love the way you've embraced my mother as family. I love the way you light up when you talk about the scholarship recipients. I love everything about you." Isabella felt tears streaming down her face. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have for months, but I didn't know if you felt the same way." Dominic cupped her face in his hands. "I've felt the same way since the day you risked everything to help a stranger. That's when I knew you were someone special, someone I wanted in my life forever." "Forever?" Isabella asked. "If you'll have me," Dominic said, dropping to one knee and pulling out a small velvet box. "Isabella Martinez, will you marry me? Will you let me love you and your children for the rest of our lives? Will you help me build something beautiful together?" Isabella stared at the ring, a simple but elegant diamond that caught the light beautifully, and felt her world shift on its axis. 6 months ago, she'd been a struggling single mother working as a janitor. Now she was being proposed to by a man she loved, surrounded by a family that had chosen her, with a career that fulfilled her soul. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, yes." As Dominic slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, Isabella heard applause from the doorway. Rose stood there with tears in her eyes, flanked by Maria Santos and several other restaurant employees who had clearly been in on the surprise. "Welcome to the family officially," Rose said, pulling Isabella into a warm embrace, "though you've been family in our hearts for months." "Thank you," Isabella whispered, "for everything, for accepting me, for trusting me, for showing me what real family looks like." "Thank you," Rose replied, "for saving my life and bringing me back to my son, for showing us both that love is stronger than pride and that family is about choice, not just blood." As Isabella looked around at the faces surrounding her, her fiancé, her chosen mother, her colleagues who had become friends, she realized that her story wasn't just about helping a homeless woman or reuniting a family. It was about discovering that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the simplest acts of kindness. 2 years later, Isabella Romano stood in the kitchen of the third Romano's Bistro location, watching her husband teach their scholarship recipients the art of authentic Italian cooking. The newest restaurant, located in Isabella's old neighborhood, had become a beacon of hope for the community, providing not just excellent food, but job training and educational opportunities. Rose, now 75 and more vibrant than ever, was in her element as she mentored a group of young entrepreneurs who were developing their own restaurant concepts. The scholarship program had expanded to include business training and startup funding, helping dozens of young people achieve their dreams. "Mama Isabella," called 8-year-old Sofia, Isabella's daughter, as she ran into the kitchen, followed by her younger brother Miguel. They'd both been adopted by Dominic after the wedding, and he loved them as if they were his own blood. "Nonno Dominic is teaching us how to make pasta," Sofia announced excitedly, using the Italian word for grandfather that she'd assigned to Dominic. "And Nonna Rose is telling us stories about the old country," Miguel added, referring to Rose with equal affection. Isabella smiled, watching her children embrace the large, loving family they'd gained. The restaurant empire had continued to grow, but more importantly, so had their family, through adoption, marriage, and the simple choice to love and care for each other. "What are you thinking about?" Dominic asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Just how perfect this moment is," Isabella replied, leaning into his warmth. "Even with all the chaos?" Isabella looked around at the bustling kitchen, the laughing children, the scholarship recipients learning and growing, and Rose holding court with her stories and wisdom. "Especially with all the chaos," she said, turning in his arms to kiss him. "This is what family looks like." This incredible journey of kindness, family reunions and unexpected love has reached its beautiful conclusion. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by liking and sharing it with someone who believes in the power of compassion and second chances. New stories of love, family, and transformation are coming soon. Until next time, remember that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything.